Good morning, everyone. So I'm Ross Deuchar and I'm Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of the West of Scotland. I'm delighted today to have Natalie Logan with me today from SISCO. So Natalie, do you want to just introduce yourself and say a little bit about SISCO first?
Yeah, hi Ross, thank you for having me on this afternoon. I'm really delighted to be having this chat with you. I'm the founder and the director of SISCO, and we predominantly work in prisons developing and delivering recovery initiatives that create a bridge between our prison communities and our communities out with. Really generally making sure these guys have good amounts of support that can help them sustain a meaningful life when they are released. So offering rehabilitation is what we do, Ross.
Could you just say a little bit, I mean, you mentioned in passing there about drugs and why these guys, nobody ever asks them sometimes why they've begun using drugs. What are you seeing just now, and what have you seen over the last few years in prisons in terms of the drug use issues?
Our drug culture trends have changed massively, Ross, and again, you know, the government needs to take a look at their responsibility in this. They were so keen to introduce drug testing into prisons, so your lifers that may have been on heroin. Here's the thing, the government brought in all these mandatory drug tests. So all your lifers that were maybe just sitting smoking some cannabis at night had to stop doing that because cannabis shows up in your system for 28 days. It's one of the longest drugs. So then all these guys that were spending long amounts of time in prison shifted from smoking cannabis to heroin because you can flush heroin out in 48 hours. That's the government that done that. The government, every shift in our drug policy and our drug cultures, nothing's changing, it's getting worse. Now what we're seeing is NPS, uses of NPS, and it's like no other drug that I have ever seen. You know, I have tried to, Katie McLeod for the SDF has done some of the best research that I've saw on NPS stuff, and I really follow her work. She's really, really great with all the stuff that she does, but we don't have any knowledge on it. I've been working with one of my lifers for 5 years, and he started using it 6 years ago. We started to watch the deterioration. NPS doesn't show up in a drug test, and that's why it's been used so broadly across the prisons. Mm-hmm. This individual started using it. Now his mental health deteriorated so bad. 2 years ago he was downgraded and sent back to shots. Now I sat in a room with him and another lifer in tears, and I told him, I'm never going to see you again, you're going to die. I thought that he would have died. He was hallucinating. It was horrific. I thought he was going to go take a stairs and commit suicide. That was my thought. But we continued to work with him throughout that 2 years. And now he's back in HMP Berlin. He's not used any mind-altering substance other than the methadone that he's prescribed. And he still has massive, massive mental health issues caused by the NPS.
Yeah.
Massive mental health issues.
Yeah. So that's introduced a whole new set of issues really into the prisons, the NPS, and the way in what other impact is it having aside from the mental health issues in the prisons just now?
It just seems they're just able to access it so freely, Ross, and I don't know why. It's having an impact on the mental health. You know, it's having an impact on people's appearance. I've known guys that are quite well thought of on prison, and I mean quite well thought of, good reputation, that are now walking around with poo hanging out of them, unshaved, really dirty. You know, they're putting themselves onto protection because they're getting themselves into debt because they're so addicted to the NPS.
Yeah. I suppose the level of addiction to it must be horrendous, you know, even compared to some other drugs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what in terms of when the guys are getting, you know, they're leaving prison, what impact does it have after they're released, you know, in terms of the NPS?
Gosh, you know what? It's having massive impacts. I'm working with individuals that they've never used an opiate drug. They're maybe coming in because they're an alcoholic and they're mouthy when they have alcohol in them. You know, they're in for a breach of the peace or something really, really silly. Um, if you send someone to prison and you're an alcoholic, you take away their addiction. So they're going to look for a substitute. That's the reality for addicts and alcoholics. We look for substitutes for coping strategies. That's what takes away our emotional pain. We don't have to think or feel. It's too hard. That's the trauma. So what they'll do is they'll look for an alternative. Now, no psychoactive substances, NPS, is a cheap alternative to begin with when you're in prison. And the people that are selling will draw you in until you're hooked and you're addicted, and then you'll use copious amounts of it. Now, obviously, the new psychoactive substances isn't predominant in the community. Not a lot of people are using it in the community. Not very many. They've done some research at the SDF, and it seemed to be a small pocket of people that were gathering in Glasgow to use it. So what these guys are doing is they're leaving prison addicted to NPS, and then they're going to look for a substitute. That might be methadone, it might be heroin, it might be crack cocaine. What we're mostly finding is most common use, guys leaving prison addicted to NPS, is the street diazepam just now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, how would you compare it to heroin, for instance? You know, is it having a worse impact in the prisons than heroin has in the past, for instance, would you say?
Ross, heroin is nothing compared to this. In fact, I sat with a governor of one of the Scottish Prison Service, and his words to me were, I wish I could flush the Scottish Prison Services with heroin again.
Gosh.
The worst thing we done was introduce drug policies. That was a governor for one of the Scottish Prison Services. That was his words, Ross, not mine. They know that the impact that this NPS is having. They're fully aware of it. Guys in prison taking heroin are no harm to anyone, Ross. Guys in prison that are smoking cannabis are no harm to anyone. They're not going to harm anyone. They're only trying to manage and cope with their trauma. Guys that are taking this NPS, it's a psychoactive substance. They're hallucinating, they're committing suicide. You know, one of my guys that took it thought that a rat crawled down his throat. He put his hand down his mouth and ripped his own tonsils out. That's the impact it's having.
And is it also creating more violence as well among the guys because of the effects of it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. These guys are out their face, Ross. They have absolutely no idea what they're doing. You don't get violence like that with men using heroin. You don't get violence like that with men that are using cannabis. Now, I'm not saying to get high. I'm saying only to cope and manage with your trauma. You don't get that for men like that. These young guys are taking these new psychoactive substances. They're already angry boys. And this is just really, really bringing out the anger, you know, where they're enraged by this drug. It enrages them.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose the reason that they start using it to begin with is because of the trauma they've suffered in the past, and basically they're suffering from mental health issues. What support is there available for them to be able to address those mental health issues in the prisons without having to turn towards drugs like this?
Do you know what? To be honest, Ross, the Scottish Prison Service is actually really, really changing. They're becoming more forward thinking with regards to their approach to addiction and mental health. And I think they're finally getting that their approach just now has not been working. And the outcomes speaks for itself. You know, we know that with the guys that are coming back in and out of prison, they're not being rehabilitated, they're not changing, and that's simply because no one is sitting down and offering them coping strategies how to change. I said it to an academic the other day, actually. I says, how do you expect a child to just jump on a bike and ride it right away without anyone teaching you or showing you or putting stabilizers on the bike? Like, that's the same with someone that's getting into the recovery. You need to put stabilizers on them first. You know, you need to stabilize someone first before they can just cycle away.
Mm-hmm.
They have mental health supports in prison. Not huge, Ross, you know, not what I would expect to see. Our recovery cafe can only support 20 individuals on a Tuesday and 20 individuals on a Thursday. I would be expecting to see 1,501 individuals in prison being supported. Otherwise, what rehabilitation are we offering? You can't put someone in prison, give them 3 meals a day and expect them to come out and change. That's not going to happen.
No. And a lot of the time, I mean, some of the conversations I've had with some of the guys, they suggest that sometimes it's something as simple as they just can't sleep, at night. And so they turn towards, legal highs sometimes to help them to sleep. How can we resolve that?
I'm working with a guy in HMP shorts just now. He's got tinnitus, he doesn't have a drug problem, and smokes NPS because it's the only thing that helps him sleep and takes away the buzzing in his ears. He's been to a doctor, he's tried to get support for it. There's, for whatever reason, they won't give him medication to help him. So his alternative is he will use an illegal substance within the prison.
Yeah. So, what do you think needs to change, Natalie, in terms of drug policy in prisons?
We need to completely change our whole drug policy, Ross. Our drug policy doesn't work. It absolutely doesn't work. There needs to be more of an empathetic approach to prisoners. We need to be looking at the cause of them constantly going back to prison. Here's the thing, Ross, if you're going to send wee Joe Bloggs to prison 25 times because he keeps committing the same crime to feed his habit, so it's costing taxpayers 35 grand every year wee Joe Bloggs is going to prison for the same thing, at what point do we not turn around and say, okay, Joe Bloggs is only going to jail because he's a drug addict and he's only committing crime to feed his drug habit. Let's look at rehab, which is going to cost us 30 grand as an alternative. It might work, it might not. Let's take a risk. That's what needs to change. The criminal justice system is not taking risks with people, Ross, at all. I had the campaign with Favour UK and it was looking at why no one was getting funded for rehab. No one's getting the option, I got that. I was very, very fortunate to be given that opportunity of rehab. 3 months was funded and 3 months my family paid for. If I didn't get that opportunity, Ross, I would still have post-traumatic stress. I would still be traumatised. There was sexual abuse, emotional abuse. There was so much violence in my house, such a hostile environment. If I wasn't abstracted from society and put in a safe environment 50 miles away from Glasgow to receive trauma counselling, grief counselling, understand what recovery was, what is life going to be like, never having a substance in my body ever again. How do I manage that? Because I didn't know how to cope with life without a substance. This is what we need to be offering these guys. 30% of the guys that I work with have been abused by a system, Ross, really abused by a system. From, professionals cause so much harm to children and they don't even see it. We're taking children off their parents. We're not offering the parents rehab or family rehabs or family bonding. As professionals, we need to step back and say, okay, our approach is not working. Collectively, together as professionals, what can we do to make it better?
Yeah, that's a good